like to encourage you to turn to the book of Luke, Gospel of Luke. We're going to be in chapter 8, taking a look at verses 26 through 39. So Luke chapter 8, verses 26 through 39. And this morning we're going to talk about one of the most interesting interactions that Jesus had in his earthly ministry. He had a lot of interactions, but this is definitely one of the most interesting ones. And in today's text, we're going to see Jesus cast out a legion of demons from a man who was living among the tombs of the Gerasenes. Now, the healing of this demon-possessed man is described in 3 of the 4 Gospels. You can find it in Matthew chapter 8, verses 28 through 34. You can find it in Mark chapter 5, verses 1 through 20. And you can find it in today's text in Luke chapter 8, verses 26 through 39. And if you were to read those 3 texts in that order, you're going to notice something interesting. Matthew mentioned Jesus healing 2 men who were demon-possessed, while Mark and Luke only mentioned 1 man who was healed. Now, these stories are not opposed to one another. Actually, it is just simply 2 different approaches of the retelling of the same story. We can appropriately assume that there were 2 men who were healed of their possession. However, for some reason, Mark and Luke just thought it necessary to only focus on the healing of 1 man as opposed to both of them like Matthew did. It's just a retelling of the same story. And Mark and Luke wanted to focus on one particular aspect, and Matthew another. And the events that we'll unpack today come directly after Jesus calmed the storm in chapter 8, verses 22 through 25. Now, here's the deal. These 2 events are directly linked in more ways than we typically want to realize. And because of that, I want to read verses 22 through 25 in order to kind of set the stage for today's text. All right? So I'm going to go back to verse 22 now. One day, we don't know what day it was, but one day he, talking about Jesus and his disciples, got into a boat with his disciples, and he said to them, "Let's go across to the other side of the lake." Now, this lake is Lake Tiberias, also known as the Sea of Galilee. So they set out, and as they sailed, Jesus fell asleep. And a windstorm came on the lake, and they were filling with water and were in danger. And they went and woke him, saying, "Master, Master, we're perishing." And he awoke and rebuked the wind and the raging waves, and they ceased. And there was a calm. And he said to them, "Where's your faith?" And they were afraid, not of the seas, but they were afraid of another guy who was in the boat, Jesus. And they marveled, saying to one another, "Who then is this that he commands even winds and water, and they obey him?" Now in verse 22, Luke gives no indication as to why Jesus went on this boating adventure, this cruise. But we're soon going to realize that it was to show the power that Christ had over the natural world. And we'll also see that it is connected to what happens in today's text. So not only was Jesus flexing his muscles and showing his power over the sea and over the winds, there's also a theological point that Jesus was making that actually, again, connects to today's passage. You see, in the first century, biblical cosmology would attribute certain aspects of creation with theological connotations. So, for example, the desert and the wilderness represented a place that was abandoned by God, while mountains were associated with the habitation of God. It was on the mountain that Moses encountered God. It was on the mountain that Elijah encountered God. It was on the mountain where Peter, James, and John watched Jesus in his transfiguration. So in Scripture, mountains are associated with a place where God does supernatural things. It's not only common within the Judeo-Christian background, but it's also extremely common in the Greek world and in the Roman world as well. I mean, what Greek god lives on a mountain? Zeus. Well, in the first century, people also associated oceans with supernatural activity. Oceans were a place where the Leviathan lived. I'd hate to be swimming in those waters. And oceans were also directly associated with the idea of chaos. For the Greeks and for the Romans of the time, they would have associated Poseidon or Neptune with control over the oceans. And many scholars think that since Luke's gospel and the book of Acts were written to a Gentile named Theophilus, many scholars believe that the telling of Jesus calming the storm served a double meaning. Jesus was showing that he not only had the power over the natural world, but he also had power and authority over chaos. The idea of chaos. You see, in creation, when God created it, everything was what? Good. That means it was in working order. It did what it was supposed to do. When sin entered the world, what happened? Chaos came. The arch nemesis of God is chaos. God is a God of order. He loves order. He loves it when we have things in order. We're actually being an image bearer of Him when we live our lives in order. It's a beautiful thing to the Lord. And so the oceans were often associated in the first century with chaos and confusion and danger. And what does Jesus do? He lords over the chaos. So not only in chapter 8, 22 through 25 do we see him calming the natural order, we see him also bringing about balance to chaos. It's like I'm ending that now. Which ties in to today's text. So let's dive in. Then they, meaning Jesus and his disciples, they were still on this cruise, okay, sailed to the country of the Gerasenes, which is opposite Galilee. Now let's stop right here and unpack this a little bit. The Gerasenes were a group of people who lived in ancient Gerasa or Gerada in the southeast portion of the Sea of Galilee. These two cities were Gentile cities who were filled with people who were culturally identified as being Greek or Roman. They were pagan to the core. They were not Jewish. And it's believed that the specific area where Jesus performed this coming miracle was located in modern-day Kursi, because archaeologists have found like a cemetery there and graves, and also the hill over there in Kursi, the mountainside kind of slopes down into the water, and so they can kind of correctly assume that this is the territory that Jesus did this miracle. What's interesting, the name Gerasene means those who come from pilgrimage or those who fight. It's kind of interesting. So let's continue in verse 27. When Jesus had stepped out on land, there met him a man from the city who had demons. For a long time he had worn no clothes, and he had not lived in a house but among the tombs. When he saw Jesus, he cried out and fell down before him and said with a loud voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torment me." For he had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man. For many a time it had seized him, and he was kept under guard and bound with chains and shackles, and he would break the bonds and be driven by the demon into the desert. Again, a place of wandering, a place of abandonment. Jesus then asked him, "What's your name?" And he said, "Legion," for many demons had entered him, And they begged him not to command them to depart into the abyss. Let's stop right here. So verses 27 through 31 are slam full of meaning. According to verse 30, this man wasn't merely dealing with demonic influence or oppression. It wasn't simply that he was being oppressed a little bit by the demonic or influenced by the demonic. No. This guy had full-blown demonic possession. And not only just a little bit of a possession, he had a whole lot of it. In fact, what were the names of the demons in him? What do they call themselves? Legion. That's a very Roman thing. Legion is in reference to a Roman military group that was comprised of 5,000 to 6,000 men. Now, Luke isn't necessarily saying that this man was possessed by 5,000 to 6,000 demons. That's a full tank of gas if it was. Maybe I shouldn't. We'll roll with it. Rather, Luke was communicating that just a large number of demons were occupying this man. Again, we don't know the specific number. That's not the point. The point is there's a whole lot of demonic stuff going on inside this dude. And did you notice in verses 27 through 29 the sad state? Oh, the sad state that the possession had left this man in. Let's unpack this a little bit. First, the demonic possession left this man without dignity. It left him without dignity, guys. Did you notice this guy wasn't wearing any clothes? The demonic influence over this man had such a stronghold over him that it left him with no reason left in his mind. This man didn't have reason enough to know that he didn't have clothes on. And all social decency, I almost said social distancing, social decency and social norms had left this man. This man not only had no dignity about him, he also had no regard for dignity. It was as if the concept of dignity had left the man. His mind had become so corrupted by the demonic that he had no regard for his own personal dignity or also the dignity of others that he came in contact with. He was like a wild animal. And this was a result of the demonic activity within this guy. And it can honestly serve as a lesson. You start messing with things that are anti-Christ, against Christ, it'll wreck your mind. And you'll justify things you never thought you would. You'll end up being places and doing things you never would have thought you would have. And all of this is the effect of the demon possession on this guy. The second effect that the demon possession had on this guy was that he was living among the tombs of the city. Living among the tombs of the city. Much like the sea back in the first century, tombs and dead things in the first century were associated with evil supernatural activity. And for the Jew, it was a place of uncleanliness. You didn't mess with tombs, you didn't mess with dead things. People in antiquity didn't like hanging out among the graveyards because of the demonic attachment to the place. And in the case of this man, it shows the dark association that he was driven to. He was driven to a dark place. Instead of living among people, instead of living in a home surrounded by friends and family with a wife and kids, this man was surrounded by death and decay. That is the result of the demonic effects on this guy. The demonic possession was ruining him. Third, the demonic activity in this man had led him to physical enslavement. Physical enslavement. Verse 29 says that this man will become so seized by the demonic that people would have to have to chain him down. They'd have to chain him down. Now, whenever I read this, my heart truly broke. It's such a sad picture of what the demonic had led this guy to. This man was so out of his mind that he had become a danger to himself and to others. And because of the powerlessness of the individuals around him, the only option that they had to protect him from himself and protect them from him was to chain him down. But not only that, the text also said they had to place a guard to protect him from himself and everybody else from him. They had to guard the guy. What a sad place to live in. It honestly just is so sad to see how these demonic influences that I'm sure probably promised him the world betrayed him. In the case of this demonic possession, the supernatural power that was in him manifested itself in physical strength. And this man would actually break the chains, physically freeing himself to where he would run off in the desert for days on end. Still chained up, though, still enslaved to the demonic. Fourth, when the man did free himself, he ran in the desert. Like I mentioned a moment ago, the desert had an association with it in the first century as a place where God had abandoned. The desert was a wild place. It was void of anything that provides the necessities of life. And that was the territory that this man was driven to, both physically and spiritually. This was the lowest of the lows for this man. This is honestly a sad, sad state. This man was completely handed over to the demonic, completely wrecked by his choice to follow the darkness instead of the light. Because the man did choose this. Oh, but the story takes an awesome twist. Let's drop back in verse 28 and continue reading to verse 33. We're going to take a look at the effects of a holy encounter. So those four previous points were the effects of a demonic encounter. This is going to be the effects of a holy encounter. When he saw Jesus, he cried out and fell down before him and said with a loud voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torment me." For he had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man. For many a time it had seized him. He was kept under guard and bound with chains and shackles, but he would break those bonds, be driven by the demon into the desert. And Jesus asked him, "What's your name?" He said, "Legion, for we're many." Verse 31, and they begged him not to command them to depart into the abyss. 32, now a large herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside, and they begged him to let them enter these. So he gave them permission. Isn't that interesting? Christ gives permission for the demonic to do whatever they do. Then the demons came out of the man and entered the pigs, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and drowned. Now, this is a very interesting turn of events in the text. When Jesus landed on the shore, the demon-possessed man fell down before Jesus and said, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God?" And this is a telling passage concerning the power of Christ. You see, the demons lorded over this man, and they had complete possession of this man. Yet when Jesus showed up, they cowered before him. Do you get the picture? The demons lorded over the man, but when Jesus showed up, Jesus lorded over the demons. Checkmate. They actually verbalized their cowardice by questioning the reason for Jesus coming to their territory. What's funny is Jesus didn't announce who he was when he landed. Rather, the demons immediately knew who he was. The demons begged Jesus not to torment them and then asked Jesus to cast them into a large herd of pigs on the hillside. So Jesus obliges to the demons' request. So why were there pigs on the hillside? Let's ask that question. The reason why there were pigs on this hillside was because the Gerasenes were a pagan people who sacrificed pigs to their demonic gods. That's what they did. And think about the irony of the scene. Think about how ironic this is. For the Jews, pigs were considered what? Unclean. You don't mess with pigs. Tombs were considered what? An unclean place, an unclean thing. You don't touch the tombs. Gentiles were considered what? An unclean people group. Jesus, a Jew, and his disciples who were Jews, entered into a territory that was surrounded by the unclean. They were among the tombs. They were among the Gentiles. They were among pigs. Not only simply pigs, they were pigs that were being harvested to sacrifice to the demonic, to the unclean, to the evil supernatural entities that these people worshiped. This whole scene was just wrong for a Jew to be at. But it's exactly where Jesus wanted to be. Why? Jesus loved this man. He loved this man. He loved these people. And he wanted to see them reconciled to him. And to give up this unclean demonic worship that they were involved in. And so Jesus orders the demons out of the man and into the pigs. I love this. Why that? It signifies his power over the demonic, and it symbolizes his ending of the pagan sacrifices that the Gerasenes were involved in. He ruined the system. You people want to sacrifice these pigs to these demons. Let's get rid of the pigs. Power. Let's jump back into verse 34. When the herdsmen saw what had happened, they fled and told it in the city and in the country. Then people went out to see what had happened, and they came to Jesus and found the man, the once demon-possessed man, sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind. And they were afraid. These herdsmen and the people that came to check this out, they were afraid. Those who had seen it told them how the demon-possessed man was healed. When this man was possessed by the demons, he threw himself on the ground before Jesus, humiliated, broken, defeated, defected, completely wrapped up with this demon possession. Yet here, he sits at the feet of Jesus as a friend of Christ, a disciple of Christ, reconciled, made in his right mind, healed. The first picture is him coming at Jesus and falling down, being completely controlled by a power that was more powerful than him, and yet now he's seated at his feet, like a student does to a good teacher. That's how this guy now found himself. Verse 37, then all the people of the surrounding country of the Gerasenes asked him to depart from them, asked Jesus to depart, for they were seized with great fear. So what did Jesus do? Got in his boat and returned. Went back up to Capernaum. The man from whom the demons had gone begged that he might be with him. But Jesus sent him away, saying, "Return to your home and declare how much God has done for you." And he went away proclaiming throughout the whole city how much Jesus had done for him. In verses 37 through 39, we see two responses to the power of Christ. Two responses to the power of Christ. The first response was rejection. The people who showed up to see what was going on, what happened, were seized with great fear, and so they wanted Jesus to leave. They encountered Jesus. They didn't like it. So they were like, "Please go away." They couldn't handle the holiness. They couldn't handle the majesty or the power. These people loved the darkness and they wanted to stay in it. However, there was a second response: proclamation. The man who was healed wanted to follow Jesus. "I'll follow you anywhere, Jesus. Let's go. I don't even care where you're sailing to. I just want to be with you." And what did Jesus do? He said, No. I want you to stay. I want you to tell everybody about what happened. This man went on proclaiming the story of Christ. Both groups of people witnessed the power of Christ. One group wanted to cower and remain in their darkness and neglect the light, while this one guy wanted to follow Christ with everything he had in him. And he wanted to follow the light and abandon the darkness. This demon-possessed man went from a fearful man who was led by a dark power that ruled him to a fearless man who was led by the power of Christ that now ruled him. We as Christians should never, ever, ever, ever live in fear. Why? We follow a Savior who, according to today's text, and many other texts like Matthew 28, contains all authority. Not just a little authority, all authority. No demonic power has authority over Christ. No political power has authority over Christ. No natural catastrophe has power over Christ. No person has power over Christ. No person's plans has power over Christ. Christ is all powerful and will complete and accomplish his purposes even in spite of our purposes and even in spite of our plans. That's how Christ works. He is all powerful. And we need to remember that on a day-to-day basis. When Jason told Mike and I a couple of weeks back about his plan to leave and to go to Ridgecrest, I was so happy for the Palmer family, but I was also a little shocked. When I went home and kind of finally got the rest of the day behind me and I laid in bed, my mind started racing. You ever done that? Isn't that fun? I mean, you talk about just a fun time laying awake at night all night long with your mind just... So I started asking the what-if questions, the what-are questions. What are we going to do? What's the next steps? What if people leave? What if? What if? What if? What if? What if? And after about 30 seconds of that, the Lord just kind of spoke to me and said, "Hey, Leroy." He calls me that. "Hey, Leroy, Do you know who Jesus is? Because the last time I checked, Jesus is Lord over all the earth. And He's Lord over His own church. Amen? We don't have to know it all. We don't have to have all the answers figured out. Because we trust in the one who does have it figured out. I am not worried one bit as to the direction of this awesome congregation. I ain't worried one bit. Why? Because me and Mike have all the plans figured out? No, we got some plans. Don't think we're just like, whatever. We're not like that. But we ultimately trust in the one who died for this body of believers and rose again. And He loves this body of believers. And I don't need to be laying in the corner in the fetal position freaking out. Neither do you. Christ has all authority. He'll do what He does. But that can also be applied to every area of our lives, guys. When you lose a job, when you stand up for what is right and you lose your job, Christ is Lord over that. He's Lord over all of it. All of the things that we waste our energy and our time worrying about, Christ has it. And He's Lord over it. And He's working things out for His glory. And so after I kind of had that thought, I just felt completely asleep. Snoring like a log. No. Sleeping like a log. Forget it. You know what I'm trying to say. Sleeping like a baby. Yeah, whatever. Guys, it should be like that with all the aspects of our lives. The mere fact that Jesus spoke to these demons and they were cast out of this man, out of this guy, shows that His power is supreme and over all, and we don't need to live in fear. We don't need to live in fear of persecution. We don't need to live in fear of losing jobs and all of these other things. We can trust in the hand of Christ, and we can remember and trust in and believe in and walk in Genesis 18:25. Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just? Genesis 18:25, again, shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just? Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just? He will. It may not appear that way on our side, but He will do what is just. He will work it out. If you're going to get a tattoo, get that tattooed on you. So you'll never forget it. Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just? He will. He will. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Oh, Heavenly Father, we thank You for Your goodness and kindness, and we thank You that You are just and You will work things out according to Your plan, Father. And we do not need to live in fear. We don't need to live in fear when the big stuff comes our way, and we don't need to live in fear when the small stuff comes our way, because we know and trust in the one who has it all under control, and that is You. Father, help us to remember this truth. You are in control. We are not, and we trust in You.